What does it mean to be a man? Growing up, I was socialized to believe that being a good man meant being hardworking, it meant providing for your family, and constantly being strong. So, you can imagine why it was a bit shocking when I realized that not everybody viewed masculinity the same way I did. One day, I was catching up with my friends from high school, and we ended up talking about our dating lives. The men of the group couldn't help but talk about how perfect their sweetheart was and how they couldn't stop thinking about them. Just like hopeless romantics, we all ended our stories saying, this one could be the one for life, man. But the women, on the other hand, oof, they were telling a whole nother story. They talked about how terrible their dates were with men, how uncomfortable the men made them feel, and they expressed their yearning to find at least one good man. It felt like the air turned tense, and us men were wondering what the women were trying to get at. Until my friend casually said, you know what? All men are just trash. It felt like she completely flipped the room upside down when she said that. And us men were left wondering, did she really just say that about us? And so, who here, by the raise of hands, has ever heard the phrase, men are trash? Exactly. It's a lot of us. It's a commonly used phrase today, but it has such a negative connotation to it. After I started hearing this phrase more frequently in my life, it made me wonder, what does it really mean to be a good man? How could traits such as being hardworking or providing for one's family ever give masculinity such a bad representation? And well, to answer that, I think back to the first person who taught me what it meant to be a man, which is my dad. He's kind, loving, and semi-funny. And throughout my life, his support has never been limited for my family. He provided us a home, puts food on our table, and it goes above and beyond to be there when we need help. Yet, the quality I admire most in my dad is his ability to hold me accountable when I made mistakes while still believing that I could do better. And throughout my life, I've definitely tested this quality a couple of times. For example, 2 years ago, I accidentally crashed this massive transit van into another car. My mom immediately yelled at me in Spanish, por andar en el teléfono, for being on your phone, and I was panicking. But when I called my dad to tell him, he said, Andy, it's going to be okay. I'm on my way home to help you. But you're paying for everything. And he hung up on me. But he was there for me when I needed the most help. I just attributed him learning this quality from his background. You see, both my parents grew up in La Ciudad de Mexico, or Mexico City, until they immigrated to Los Angeles, where I was born and raised. In this community, I learned the positive aspects, I grew up in a predominantly Latinx or Latino community where I learned the positive aspects of masculinity from my dad and other men in my life. Yet, that being said, I was also learning about machismo. It's a complex concept that looks and is defined differently by everybody. But the way I've come to understand it is the dominant expectations and values of what it means to be a man in Latinx culture. Some of the socialized behaviors with masculinity include violence, aggressiveness, lack of vulnerability, substance abuse, and so much more. In the midst of all this, I'm grateful for my dad teaching me valuable lessons, such as how to be patient or how to be loving. But that being said, he was also an alcoholic. Most people would only see the fun side to this when he cracked jokes and be the life of the party, but they wouldn't see the consequences behind this. More often than not, my dad would be gone for days to drink, which made it difficult for him to be emotionally present for my family. And over the years, I realized how alcoholism only seemed to intensify these machismo traits, and his actions started to reflect more of that belief that cis men are dominant over everybody else. A couple of years ago, I took a bus to back home in LA after my first month away at college to escape all the academic stress and homesickness I was experiencing. Although I had gone to LA by myself, my dad had promised me to drive me back to school the next day. The problem was, he had gone drinking the day before, and I didn't have a backup plan. This caused a huge argument between my parents. ¿Qué estás haciendo? No me puedes decir nada. What are you doing? You can't tell me anything. And I don't really remember much of what they're saying, but in the midst of the commotion, like a sharp knife to the chest, I just heard my dad yell at my mom, "Yo pago por todo y sin mí, no eres nada. I pay for everything, so without me, you wouldn't be anything." How does one respond to that? I thought to myself, if I want to reflect everything good about my dad, does that also mean how to reflect the harmful behaviors? Were there any healthy versions of manhood out there? And well, what a more perfect time to have that existential question as I was going into one of the most difficult, overwhelming, and wildest times of my life, college. What was even more ironic was the fact that I ended up attending the #1 party school in America, according to niche.com, UC Santa Barbara. But when I got here, I realized how vastly similar the UCSB culture was to machismo, with a lot of the same expectations held on for other men. Such examples include lack of vulnerability, excessive drinking, but I also saw other things as well, such as the normalization for men to harass and objectify people, or the pressure to have as much sex as possible. Throughout my 4 years, I was ridiculed for not following any of that. I didn't want to harass or objectify people because I have individuals in my life who share their experiences dealing with that. I didn't want to have as much sex as possible because I've been in a relationship with my high school sweetheart for 4 years. And lastly, I didn't want to drink because I was scared I was never going to find a healthy balance. And when people find about this, they often give me weird faces or try to pressure me for me to align with these expectations. For example, one time I rejected alcohol from somebody I had just met that day. And the reaction to me was, "Why not? You just gotta man up and drink, Andy." Most people see machismo as something specific towards the Latinx community. And while it is influenced by cultural experiences, a lot of the same expectations are held on for other men. We commonly label these expectations as toxic masculinity, hegemonic masculinity. But the way I see it, they're all subsystems under the overarching system of patriarchy. The social system that institutionalized the belief that cis men are dominant over everybody else, and over men deemed not man enough. If men are socialized to be violent, aggressive, and assert their dominance as a way to prove their manhood, then I ask you, what's going to happen? Men are more likely to inflict harm to others. In 2021, a criminal victimization study done by the US Department of Justice shows that male offenders make up 77% of crimes involving violence in the US. Now, following these harmful expectations even proves harmful for men themselves. In 2018, the American Psychological Association released a study stating that men who follow these harmful expectations are more likely to encounter physical and mental problems, substance abuse, isolation, early mortality, incarceration, and so much more. Even if men wanted to step outside of these expectations, they're often targets of physical and emotional violence, they're called derogatory terms, and they're ostracized as a way to get them to realign with these expectations. Now, the toughest part about this is that people generally don't talk about masculinity. And from that, they don't have free space to envision what a healthy manhood could look like. And that's what I'm trying to do. You see, I work with the Masculinities Project, a group of students, staff, and faculty where we develop programs on campus dedicated to talking to students about masculinity as we envision what a healthy manhood could look like. Now, I want you to imagine what it's like asking college-age men to be vulnerable. It's hard. And in facilitating these programs, I get a variety of reactions. I get people on their phones, I get people who are silent, but attentive to what's being said. And then there's the people, the moment I ask them to share about their experiences, immediately open up. A couple of months ago, I was facilitating a small workshop of 10 people where I was talking about the socialization of men and my experiences with it. And to open up the floor to the audience members, I asked them, can anybody relate to what I just said? And almost everybody in the room shared their experiences, and they talked about how those experiences affected them growing up. It was a great conversation. And at the end of the workshop, a participant raised his hand and asked if he could share a story. This is what he said. There have been multiple times where I've been told to man up as a way for me to align with those expectations you were talking about, Andy. But one of the most hurtful experiences I had was when I was 7 years old and my mom passed away. Before I even had a chance to grieve, my uncle came up to me and said, "Boys don't cry." And as a kid, I thought to myself, why can't I cry? I'm just a kid who lost his mom. Almost everybody that day ended up crying, grieving for what had happened to him, but also because we finally had a space to be vulnerable on our experiences. It's moments like that that remind me the importance and the necessity of discovering a healthy manhood. But before I continue, I want to be clear on a couple of things. I'm not anti-men, nor am I trying to emasculate anybody. A lot of the traits socialized with masculinity are good, such as being strong through difficult moments or providing for one's family. Other traits are normal, such as having sexual relationships or drinking alcohol. Yet, it becomes a problem when we base men's worth on how well they embody these traits, and when these traits inflict harm into others, to ourselves. I'm trying to promote a culture change in where we deconstruct the harmful behaviors often socialized with masculinity, such as aggressiveness, while we engage our men and boys in promoting healthier traits, such as how to be loving or how to communicate with our loved ones. It's not about taking away what it means to be a man, but it's expanding our definition of it. Over time, I'm trying to build a better world for tomorrow, but I can't do this by myself. And that's why, folks, I need your help. I need you with me. I'm going to talk about 3 different ways that you can help promote a culture of healthy manhood. And if I want you to leave with anything, it's these 3 things. Number 1, holding others and yourselves accountable. More often than not, it's other people who try to hold men accountable, but that is not enough. Men need to hold other men accountable. We can't ignore the harmful behaviors others are doing because permission is only given, this is only giving permission for this to continue. So next time you hear a sexist joke or witness harassment, challenge it. A study done by the International Federation of Gynecology and Obstetrics shows that family and friends are the most powerful form of normative pressure in preventing excessive drinking, harassment, and other harmful behaviors. Understand that you have the power to influence people. In addition, I challenge every man in this hall to think about themselves and think about the ways they've exceeded and met these harmful expectations. We all have, including myself. I'm trying to change for the better, but I'm a human who makes mistakes. And that's why it's important to understand one another. We need to understand that these harmful expectations have been implemented for generations, and they're reinforced by constant socialization. We need to understand that it's the system that's a problem, and we're only trying to break out of the cycle. And that's why, for everybody else, we need your help. I often hear people say, it's not my job to educate men. And yes, I agree. But we need people with different experiences and perspectives if we're going to promote a more inclusive and welcoming environment. More often than not, it's other people in my life, such as my partner, my mom, my sister, who teach me how to be a better person when they hold me accountable. I understand that sometimes it isn't safe to speak up, and that's okay. But when the brother or father shares their vulnerability, celebrate them for it, and further encourage them to step away from these harmful expectations. Number 2, creating safe spaces talking about masculinity. Masculinity is such a complex concept that we're still trying to understand. And that's why it's important to hear different perspectives, because it only helps you understand your own experiences better. That's proven truthful for me, but I was avoiding the one person I needed to talk to the most. My dad. I've actually never talked to him about how his alcoholism affected me, and his TED Talk forced me to do that. I'm not gonna lie, folks. The night I called to tell him, I was nervous and I was shaking. But when he picked up the phone, I took a deep breath, took a leap of faith, and I told him everything I talked about today. I expressed my yearning to not lose the time we had to talk to one another, And I told him that no matter what, I was his son, and I was always gonna love him. And you know what he said to me that day? I love you too. Yo te quiero también. And that day, we ended up talking over an hour about how his dad struggled with alcohol and he wasn't present in my dad's life. That day, I understood that my dad was only learning how to be present for my family and break out of the cycle. That day, I ended the conversation with him saying, Dad, there's going to be an audience listening to this, but the most important person I need there is you. You think you could come? And well, I'm glad to say he's here today, somewhere in this big hall. Thank you. And that day, the understanding that conversation brought to me, I tell you now, that's why I encourage everybody in this hall to have a conversation with people in your life to understand each other from a place of love. And actually, I'm proud to say, with my dad, he's actually 3 years sober. Thank you. Appreciate it. And that brings me to my final point in promoting a healthy manhood. Number 3, be present. Up here, there's only a fraction of the people in my life who's without their love and support, I wouldn't be here today. I say that to show that this work is collaborative, and we're going to need each other if we're going to promote a change. I realize now that my question of what does it mean to be a good man extends past masculinity, and it's truly about what it means to be a good person. When I think of good people, I think about my dad. He taught me that nobody's perfect, and we're going to make mistakes in trying to change the culture. We might not get it right the first time, or even the 10th time, but it's about showing up every single day and doing the work to be a better person. And for me, that makes him one of the best people I know. Thank you. Muchas gracias.